Among the hangers in my studio, my eyes stopped on a pattern I knew like the back of my hand. A design that was rightfully mine, now shining on a foreign canvas. My name is Clara Reynolds, 36, a fashion designer. These are my lines, my legacy. These words resonated, but felt distant in the face of the betrayal I had just discovered. On the laptop screen, the dress I instantly recognized stood out, a blatant, poorly executed copy, yet undeniably capturing its essence. Every detail, every pleat I had obsessively created, was there, without my permission. Rage threatened to explode, a fire that wanted to consume everything, but I contained it. I knew blind fury doesn't rebuild. What I needed was strategy. Confirmation came in a quick call, a voice low and controlled, mirroring the urgency I felt. The stolen design was circulating on social media, threatening to destroy what I had spent years building. I looked at the details of the patterns, weak imitations of my creations, almost subtle to the untrained eye, but obvious to me. Those small strokes, the slant of the side stripe, the sophisticated gathering at the sleeves, the meticulous stitching, had been stolen. In my mind, the only culprit emerged with clarity. Sophia Miller, best friend, my business partner, confidant of my most intimate inspirations, the one who guarded the secrets of my creative process, and who now, silently, was betraying me. I stared at the photograph on my desk, Sophia and me, smiling at the last fashion week. It was a frozen past, a fragile symbol of a broken friendship. Pain squeezed my chest, but I couldn't succumb to despair. There was more at stake. My hands flew to the fabric, those same threads that gave me my identity. Feeling its texture was remembering my creative power, the exclusivity of my art. "You'll pay," I whispered to myself, with calculated coldness. I knew the confrontation wouldn't be an explosive storm, but a silent war of patience and intelligence. I set the laptop aside and walked to the sewing machine. The steady hum heightened my focus. Each stitch was a statement, a mark of who I truly was. Not just a designer, but a guardian of my own lines, ready to defend them with surgical precision. The phone rang again, but I ignored it. Each call would interrupt the flow of my thoughts. I needed to prepare. The lines that had been stolen were more than designs. They were my legacy, my voice. And I would reclaim every inch, plotting a meticulous path to justice. It wouldn't be a battle of words or shouting. It would be a silent execution, a strategic drawing where every move would count. As the sun illuminated the studio, I felt reborn in that territory, ready to fight for what's mine. With patience, coldness, and unwavering determination. The days that followed the discovery of the theft were filled with a heavy silence and a whirlwind of thoughts that wouldn't let me rest. As my hands continued to work on the fabrics in the studio, my mind incessantly traveled through the moments I shared with Sophia, my best friend and partner, trying to understand at what point our friendship transformed into betrayal. I remembered in detail the afternoons when, side by side, we discussed sketches, studied color palettes, and chose fabrics, exchanging hushed laughter and confidences that I believed were eternal. Sophia always seemed to be a dedicated, attentive, and determined apprentice, reverently absorbing every piece of my creation, as if guarding a sacred secret. I didn't realize then the subtle shadows of ambition hidden behind that attentive gaze. A silent but deadly shadow. The studio, the birthplace of my work, began to feel like contaminated territory. Each carefully selected fabric, each line aligned with passion, became a reminder of what had been stolen. Sophia, who seemed invisible on the sidelines, always watching with almost obsessive attention, now clearly showed herself to be calculating. I remembered the small changes, the different gleam in her eyes, the restrained laughter, that I had previously considered innocent, but which were actually instruments of her insatiable hunger for recognition and power. Above the material loss, I felt the weight of the breach of trust. I looked at the photograph that rested on my desk, Sophia and me, smiling at the last fashion week, and saw not only an old image, but the end of an era, a precious bond, now irrevocably broken. On the runways, which were my sanctuary and stage of expression, The designs were born to be exposed to the world, carrying my essence. However, Sophia transformed my ideas into false stripes that came to life with another label, stained by the shadow of duplicity. I couldn't ignore the influence of Camila Diaz, the fashion editor whom I considered an ally, but who proved to be a key player in this plot. Behind her apparent professionalism, she promoted the adulterated designs on social media, fueling Sophia's ephemeral success and receiving commissions for it. This subtle alliance isolated me even more, reinforcing the feeling that I was alone against a larger and more calculating system. Despite the internal storm, I maintained my composure. The most precious of resources for a designer accustomed to seeing in the millimeter, in the smallest detail, the difference between success and failure. I mentally reviewed each technique I had entrusted to Sophia, each nuance of the color palette, each fabric choice with such care that it seemed to tattoo my mark on time. My pain transformed into fuel for action. I analyzed the subtle changes in Sophia's behavior, the misplaced glances, the whispered conversations, the laughter in meetings I wasn't a part of. Each fragment seemed to fit into the puzzle of betrayal, before invisible, now terrifyingly clear. This realization didn't bring despair, but a steely determination. The nostalgia of the good times was replaced by a cold and precise calculation. Every piece I created, every design that came from my hands wasn't just clothing, but a silent, powerful statement of resistance. My weapon would be creativity, my battlefield the atelier I knew like the back of my hand. Attention to detail and patience in planning would be my best allies. Sophia was no longer my friend, nor my partner in dreams. She had become an ambitious adversary, ready to steal my space and my story. Camila, in turn, acted as a facilitator of this betrayal, offering the exposure and recognition that Sophia craved. But I wouldn't allow myself to be a victim of this plot. Pain would cease to be weakness and become strength. Frustration would turn into strategy. I observed the scene with keen eyes, learning in silence, architecting my route back to control of what was mine. I prepared for a battle that wouldn't be fought with shouts or scandals, but with silent and precise movements, where each step would be decisive. I knew the war that was unfolding was far more complex than it seemed. It was time to leave behind the broken trust and transform the shadows of lost friendship into firm and clear lines. After all, these are my lines, my legacy. And this legacy wouldn't be stolen with impunity. The clarity about what I faced led me to realize that relying solely on intuition wasn't enough. I needed concrete evidence, tangible clues to expose the hidden scheme unfolding behind my back. The next step required diving into records, documents, and any trace capable of precisely revealing the path of the theft. I started with the atelier's digital backup, a secret library where I kept every sketch, every minute variation of my designs. Seemingly a safe haven, that cloud file now became my investigation site. I analyzed the access logs with a cold eye. Entries at strange hours, files consulted outside the routine, suspicious downloads. It was evident that someone had intimate knowledge of my professional hours and habits. I realized I couldn't conduct this search alone and enlisted the help of Joanna, my loyal and observant assistant, who also circulated behind the scenes of the industry and gathered rumors about unusual movements. She confirmed my suspicions. Sophia was at the center of the gossip, involved in suspicious situations. With her support, I scrutinized every movement within the atelier, from internal meetings to digital transactions. I examined file exchanges, sending history, and document versions that mysteriously had small differences, forged labels, altered dates, and notes that weren't mine. I discovered pre-finalized versions that didn't match my work pattern, a forged signature that betrayed an attempt to camouflage the plagiarism. More than digital files, my attention turned to my notebook, my creative diary. Upon carefully reviewing it, I noticed torn-out pages and removed notes. Someone had been there, trying to erase crucial traces of my creative process. Simultaneously, I started trying to map Camila Diaz's participation. The editor, whom I considered an ally, appeared to have invisible hands in promoting the fraudulent designs. I uncovered small payments and agreements that indicated a clandestine network supporting Sophia, ensuring her rise at the cost of my reputation. This discovery intensified my desire to act. They clearly underestimated my analytical abilities and the care I dedicate to details. A cruel mistake. All this information formed a map, a route I needed to follow with patience and strategy. Joanna continued to be my support behind the scenes, bringing information about rumors and possible market movements I hadn't yet seen. I learned that the copied pieces were circulating through small production networks, highlighting the scheme's breadth and concealing its origins. Every compiled detail was now ammunition. My search ceased to be just for justice. It became the construction of an irrefutable dossier, proof of the masked betrayal. Although the process was exhausting, it also invigorated me. I was reconstructing my identity and control of my creative universe, using the same tools that shaped me: precise observation, attention to the smallest details, and above all, patience. From what I collected, I put together a silent plan, based on solid facts and a strategy of precise revelation where each move would count toward the final victory. I would be the guardian of my legacy, an invisible strategist transforming the pain of betrayal into power and justice. This battle wouldn't have room for errors or shouting. It would be a game of precision and timing, a duel between intelligence and cunning. I knew I was ready for it. My lines, my legacy. I thought firmly, feeling that no theft could erase who I really was. The atelier for me has always been more than a physical space. It was the pulsating heart where each line, each form, came to life according to the rhythm of my inspiration and technique. Now, it had also transformed into the board where a silent battle unfolded, meticulous and arbitrary. The trust, once full, now propelled me to caution, sometimes even calculated paranoia. Amidst this scenario, my gaze turned to the design codes, my own secret vocabulary, a visual language that only its creator could decipher. I began comparing old sketches, dated versions, and minute variations of pieces. This analysis allowed me to perceive subtleties that escaped the common eye. A wrinkle designed to create a specific shadow, a millimeter inclination of a seam, a play of transparencies in the combination of fabrics. Each detail was part of a larger puzzle, a signature that marked the true authorship. But the betrayal didn't leave obvious traces for those who didn't seek it with trained eyes. Copied versions presented intelligent modifications, with exclusions and alterations subtly inserted to evade easy detection. Sophia tried to mask the duplicity with almost surgical subtlety, a falsification between the lines that required careful analysis to be unveiled. The deeper investigation uncovered handwritten notes pilfered and tucked into Sophia's notebook, pages I never imagined leaving my studio. They contained notes nearly identical to my own, late-night scribbles, fabric formulas, color hypotheses, meticulously recorded. It was the proof I needed, the disguised copy that formed the bedrock of her burgeoning collection. Furthermore, Camila Diaz, whose demeanor had always been that of an exemplary professional, revealed herself as a subtle link in the scheme. With a skill bordering on manipulation, she'd drop discreet hints about the trends Sophia was now exploring during backstage encounters at Fashion Week and private events. Her words, as polished as they were venomous, fueled the false narrative and promoted this stolen collection as a creative revolution, obscuring my rightful authorship. My public presence and social media activity had been strategically minimized, while Sophia and Camilla worked behind the scenes to replace my creative identity with their own. The strategy was clear and cruel. Neutralize my influence to consolidate the theft and promote an ascension that wasn't theirs. I observed this game with the cold precision of a strategist, almost invisible, curtailing my movements and waiting for the right moment to act. I didn't allow myself premature revelations or impulsive actions. Every step was measured, every reaction considered. My silence, in that context, was a powerful weapon that disarmed my adversaries with its unpredictability. At the same time, mentally retracing the paths through which my art had been diverted, I decided which pieces of the investigation would be strategically used to expose the scheme. This wasn't just about evidence. It was about a carefully staged spectacle where every element was part of the script. It was a complex dance, manipulating public perception, preserving my professional and emotional safety, and ensuring that when the truth was revealed, it would be so clear and impactful that it wouldn't allow for contestation. The process demanded not only technical skill, but also a keen sensitivity to human emotions and social manipulations. Sophia and Camilla underestimated my ability to see beyond appearances, to unravel faces and intentions. I, on the other hand, transformed my pain into invisible armor, patience into ammunition, and the scientific rigor of analysis into a sharpened sword. As the analysis progressed, I manipulated my environment with surgical precision. I subtly altered data and created more complex design patterns, challenging to copy or interpret without my consent. My goal was simple: to create lures that would attract attention and expose the perpetrators when they tried to reproduce my new creations. I also began to simulate my withdrawal from the public scene. Calculated pauses, discreet absences from events, and strategic silence on social media. This maneuver aimed to give the impression that my influence was waning, encouraging Sophia and Camilla to make mistakes of overexposure and overconfidence. Meanwhile, I maintained discreet contact with industry allies, those who know the backrooms of fashion, and could corroborate my findings if a formal confrontation were necessary. These steps were not only tactical, but necessary to prepare the ground for an eventual revelation that would shake the structures built by my antagonists. I was immersed in a complex plot of shadows and reflections where every detail counted, and every move could be decisive for victory. The battle wasn't fought with shouts, but with calculated silence, ferocious patience, and the sharp intelligence that only experience could teach. In the midst of this whirlwind, my composure was my best asset, and the certainty of my legacy, the authenticity of my lines, the fuel that kept me firm and resilient. The clock of my revenge had begun to tick, and I was ready to meticulously plot the victory that would be written in the lines of my own creation. I subtly and calculatedly leaked the rumor of a new collection concept, a futuristic and complex project, almost enigmatic to the casual observer. It was the perfect bait, cast into the digital sea to attract those who had dared to appropriate my creative essence. Sophia couldn't resist. Driven by a thirst for affirmation and ambition, she quickly pursued this novelty, trying to decipher its intricacies and usurp what hadn't even been revealed yet. From afar, I observed, invisible and unperturbed, her efforts to unravel the intricate weave of my lines and cuts, a code deliberately crafted with layers of meaning and details that only I could fully comprehend. It was a creation destined to become an almost indecipherable puzzle, and the more Sophia tried to copy it, the more she left traces, unmistakable digital footprints of fraud. Every detail of that project wasn't just a piece of fabric or an artistic outline. It was a trap, ingeniously built to expose any attempt at plagiarism. The asymmetrical cuts, the nuances of color that played with light, the almost imperceptible overlays mixed with technological fabrics completely altered the perception of the garment. Sophia, unknowingly, was walking straight into the razor wire I had laid out beneath her steps. While the world saw my apparent retreat, a strategic and carefully rehearsed silence, I controlled the reins behind the scenes. This retreat simulated tiredness, even conscious detachment, a smokescreen to induce my antagonists into error. They wanted me to disappear, giving space to their false and ephemeral protagonism, but it was an invitation they couldn't refuse, plunging deeper into the game I commanded, increasingly unprotected. In this labyrinth of appearances, I maintained my rigid vigilance. I monitored social media, the comments of influencers, the silent results of Sophia and Camilla's strategies. I noticed fissures indicating veiled doubts, implicit criticisms circulating for a few attentive ears, fissures whose progress I encouraged with calculated moves. My new collection held the power to rewrite the rules of the game. Each prototype that left my studio was a veiled declaration. It wasn't just creativity reborn, but the firm affirmation of my artistic existence. It was the beginning again, the reconstruction of an empire they had tried to destroy. I watched, almost impassively, Sophia's precipitous downfall. Her brief honeymoon was ending under the growing weight of my strategy. The hands that once tried to usurp me were now empty, unable to sustain the false reign she attempted to build. Camilla, always cold and calculating, saw her influence dwindle, her credibility crumbling in the silence backstage where she once reigned with absolute power. It was a victory built on subtlety, crafted from almost invisible seams, as intricate as the pieces she herself created. Every line, every fold, carried the weight of my strategy, invisibly sketching their defeat. The phrase that guided me reverberated without fanfare, but with intensity. These are my lines, my legacy. This motto wasn't just a slogan, but a creed, a code inscribed in the pieces and the fruits of my revenge. My media appearances, my carefully modulated participation in events, my secret contacts with industry allies, everything aligned to control the narrative, to have it emerge at the right moment, strong and crystalline. It wasn't a battle of noise, but of surgical tactics and ferocious patience. I knew the climax of this contest was approaching. Patience, my greatest weapon, was beginning to bear measurable fruit, illuminating the inevitable cracks in the cold facades that Sophia and Camilla had built with such care. They would try to redeem themselves, to deflect attention, but the stage was set, unshakable, for the necessary revelation. It was more than a creative dispute. It was the unquestionable affirmation of my authorship, the reclamation of my identity. My revenge wasn't based on empty resentment, but on the methodical justice that I myself had architected. When the curtain finally fell, I would be there, backstage, the invisible mind that orchestrated everything. I would watch, serene, as the masks crumbled, ensuring that the truth was recorded in all the necessary documents so that no one could ever question it. Because, after all, these are my lines, my legacy. The future I was designing had the form of my signature, indelible, unbeatable, eternal. My unprecedented collection emerged as a whisper that quickly transformed into an elegant and overwhelming storm, reverberating through the fashion scene with the certainty that my name would no longer be forgotten or confused. Each piece revealed the technical excellence and emotional depth of someone who lives for the art of creation, the clear affirmation that I was not just a designer, but an implacable force rebuilding her empire from scratch. The impact was almost instantaneous and overwhelming. Social media, which had previously subtly aligned itself with dubious narratives, exploded with praise and admiration. Influencers, critics, and fashion lovers converged to extol the authenticity and audacity of the lines I presented. Spontaneous comments extolled the perfect balance between innovation and tradition, the revolution that my pieces provoked in the eyes and souls of those who contemplated them. There could be no clearer recognition than the sparkle in the eyes of the journalists in the front row, the headlines celebrating the rebirth of a creator, and the almost palpable gratitude in the words of those who felt my lines pulsating like a manifesto. Meanwhile, on the other side of this silent duel, Sophia watched helplessly as the house of cards she had tried to build with others' hands crumbled. Her ascent, though meteoric, could not withstand the implacable force of my reinvention. The steps she took, once confident and audacious, now became hesitant, disordered, unable to sustain a false narrative that reality was beginning to mercilessly unveil. Camilla, strategic and cold, saw the veil of control she exerted over public opinion crumble under the weight of my truth and talent. Her nebulous influence, sustained by bursts of power and discreet contacts, weakened in the face of the undeniable crescendo of my presence. The silence I had maintained for months transformed into a powerful roar, not in empty words, but in actions, results, and a firm presence in every segment of the industry. It was a victory won in the purest subtlety, woven with the same dedication and care that I applied to every seam of the pieces I launched. Each line, each meticulously crafted detail, carried the weight of my plan, not only to reclaim my space, but to dismantle the corrupt structure of others' ambition. These are my lines, my legacy. The phrase echoed in the dark corners of the internet, in whispered conversations among critics, in the silent admiration of students and young designers. It was no longer an empty phrase, but a true mantra, the source code of my revenge, imprinted not only on the pieces that paraded, but on the essences that I reclaimed. My performance was careful and strategic. The time I spent on social media, appearances at hand-picked events, discreet and warm contacts with industry allies who guarded their secrets out of loyalty or admiration. Everything was part of a plan designed to control the narrative. I didn't want room for doubt, only for the unquestionable recognition of my identity and work. It wasn't a quick or simple process. Each achievement demanded a new dose of vigilance, as Sophia and Camilla continued to attempt desperate maneuvers, tactics to discredit or deflect attention from what I was building. But I kept a firm pulse, never allowing myself to yield to provocations or mistakes that could contaminate my purpose. I reinforced, in exclusive and discreet meetings with influential professionals, the recognition of my authorship. I encouraged those who had previously remained silent out of fear or self-interest to take a stand, strengthening a network that would protect my name and work from future attempts at usurpation. My performance transcended the creative domain to reach the political intricacies of fashion, where trends, success, and the names that will remain are defined. Every step, every move, was carefully planned to reclaim everything that belonged to me, in a delicate dance between power and resistance. Sophia, increasingly isolated and exhausted, saw the fragility grow between her and Camilla, whose once secure complicity now faltered in the face of the loss of relevance and influence. Their arrogance and haste led them to make mistakes that only served to accelerate their downfall. For me, this victory meant more than a personal triumph. It was a redefinition of what justice should be in a universe where creativity is a rare and precious commodity. I intimately understood the pains and silent sacrifices of this world, and knew that authorship, respect, and artistic honesty are cornerstones that can never be destroyed with impunity. In the silence of my atelier, each new design was a celebration of my resilience, a symbol of my rebirth, and the purity of that sacred space, now freed from the shadow of betrayal. The self-confidence forged in 1,000 battles was the lighthouse guiding the strokes I created. These are my lines, my legacy. The phrase, once a promise, became a victory cry, a crystalline testament etched in fiber, line, and color. The world could try to rewrite history, but it could never erase what I had created with unwavering passion. My influence grew and solidified, transforming into a beacon for future talents, an inspiration for those who believe in authenticity and perseverance. I created with the certainty that my voice would never be silenced, and that my lines would remain beyond time. Thus, a new season began, no longer under the shadows of betrayal, but illuminated by the unique brilliance of my art and the undeniable legacy of a designer who, with courage and a cool head, knew how to fight, resist, and triumph. The pressure increased every day. The fashion world doesn't forgive weakness, and the stones the city throws can be sharp. While my new collection shone under the runway lights, Sophia and Camilla felt the inevitable fall approaching. Behind their practiced smiles, I perceived the nervousness, the little flaws that, to me, were a clear sign of the impending defeat. The outcome I had orchestrated came from a fine line between patience and rigor. The exposure would be precise, relentless, and imminent. I knew that this moment would require much more than creative talent. It would be the confirmation of my control over the entire plot, the time to present irrefutable evidence, to dismantle the mask they had worked so hard to put on. I planned for this revelation to emerge not as an untamable explosion, but as a silk thread that, skillfully pulled, unravels an entire tapestry of lies. The patience of months, hidden in my careful movements, would use the very ruthlessness of the truth as its final weapon. When Wednesday finally dawned bright and clear, I was calm. I had prepared everything in advance. A meeting with key investors, some influential guests from the cultural circle and the specialized press. The venue, discreet and elegant, reflected the sobriety of the message I intended to convey. There was no theatricality, only the certainty of authenticity emanating from every word I was about to utter. I began by showing documents, digital records, emails, Original drawings compared to those that had been plagiarized. Everything meticulously organized. A true visual and documentary dossier of the betrayal that Sophia and Camilla had orchestrated. Each piece of evidence was presented with the coolness of facts, without any room for conjecture or doubt. The faces that had once been so loyal to Sophia began to tense as they absorbed the raw reality. My former partner tried to fight back, but her voice sounded shaky, unable to compete with the irrefutable evidence. Camilla, beside me, remained silent, acknowledging the precariousness of her own situation. I concluded the presentation with a brief speech, reinforcing the message that my art, my identity, and my legacy would not be usurped with impunity. I spoke of the lines that go beyond the edges of the fabric, those that trace stories, commitments, and the soul of the creator. At that moment, as the room's lights illuminated my serene face, I felt the weight of months of struggle begin to transform into a kind of liberation. Justice, albeit belated, appeared as a bright light at the end of the tunnel. Days later, the market reflected this change. My restored reputation not only reinstated my position, but also opened new doors. Old clients returned, new partners approached, and respect for my brand grew steadily. Sophia and Camilla, isolated and discredited, made empty attempts to regain control, but the resounding crash of their fall was already a fait accompli. The fashion industry, as quick to praise as to reject, dissipated their voices in the silence of distrust. And me? I felt a cold peace take over, the kind that only the certainty of justice brings. My creation was no longer just technique and design. It was a symbol of resistance and resilience. On that rebuilt stage, the lines of my legacy were stronger than ever, and the future, finally, belonged to me.